Hi, this is the second session of our little taster sessions on what we do in politics at QE. This one's all about America, and in particular we've called it How Do You Get to Be President? And also, Can Trump Be Stopped in 2020? Because in November there'll be some presidential elections, as there are every 4 years in November. And who gets to sit in the White House for the next 4 years is going to have a huge impact not just on America, but on the rest of the world too. So, we're thinking about whether it will be Donald Trump or his challenger, Joe Biden, who sits behind the desk in the Oval Office in 2021. American politics is a huge part of what we do in the second year, including a trip to Washington, D.C. in normal times. And when we're thinking about that, it means that even during our first year of politics, we'll be keeping a really close eye on the American elections and on things that happen in Congress there. So here, we want to try and understand what kind of person you have to be the president of the most powerful country in the world. We'll also look at how the election process works, and we'll think about Trump and Biden and decide, or try to decide, which of those has the best chance of winning in the November presidential election. So is this man really fit to be president? Well, Trump's unlike every other president that's ever sat in the Oval Office before. Do you think Trump's fit to be president? You could pause for a moment and just have a think if there's someone else in the room with you. See if you can make a list of reasons why he either is or isn't fit to hold that office. To help you decide, have a look at these two clips. The first is from Trump's campaign in 2016. The second is from much more recent times, where people, even on a Fox News channel, which normally supports Trump, questions his ability to do the job.
They're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. Mexico will pay for the wall. But we have some bad hombres here, and we're going to get them out.
And it's really weak to call John McCain a loser because he was a...
I never called him. No, I don't call him.
That is outrageous. He's an American hero.
I don't like losers. But Frank, let me get to it. He hit me. He's not a war hero. He's a war hero. He's a war hero.
5.5 years.
He's a war hero because he was captured. I like people that weren't captured. I have such respect for women. I cherish women.
You've called women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell. A nice reporter. Now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember.
He doesn't have command of the subject matter.
And then I see the disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute.
He can't string a coherent sentence together.
More than ever before, we've held our rate, the numbers, everything we've done.
Stumbles all over his sentences, starts rattling off.
They can do as they want. They can do what they have to do. They know what they have to do.
We've already seen how his mental faculties are declining.
But you know, they had a debate it was really a rough time in our country.
Okay, so your answer to this question, is Trump fit to be president, might be no, and it might have a long list of reasons attached. Could be because he's got no previous experience of holding elected office. He's not quite the first one to do so, but nonetheless, he's got no experience of making the decisions that presidents often face. He's faced allegations of rape and sexual assault from, at the time of counting, 27 women, with potentially more coming out before the election. His use of racist language against Mexicans and against people of colour, describing some countries in Africa as, well, I won't use the word, but you could Google it and look it up yourself, mean that he's not somebody who looks as though he's governing for everybody. His support for white nationalists, including recruiting white nationalists into his own White House, including Steve Bannon, who was his chief strategist, who's since gone on to try and support neo-Nazi and fascist groups in Europe since he stopped doing that job for Trump, means that people question whether he's really the right person to serve a multicultural society. He's evaded his taxes, and he won't release his tax records to Congress or indeed to the federal courts. And even though he says that he had no collusion with Russia, there's no clear exoneration after the investigation which says that he didn't necessarily get the help of the Russian government to help him win the election in 2016. Even some CIA and FBI figures have claimed that maybe Trump is actually a Russian asset. But the decision as to whether or not he should be president, whether he's fit to hold office, isn't necessarily based on our opinion as to whether he's done some bad things. It's actually more about the rules that apply to anybody who wants to be president. So, let's have a look at these rules, and we can do so by playing this game of Kahoot. You can play along at home if you've got a phone or if you're using your laptop. Follow the link that's on in the corner. Okay, so the first one is false. In fact, Trump doesn't have any criminal convictions as yet, even though he's been charged with criminal offences. But even if he was, there's nothing to stop him from carrying on being president unless Congress decides that he shouldn't continue in office. And what about this one? This one is also false. Any member of the US Congress cannot really stand for presidential election. And the reason for that is because you have to be 25 to be a member of Congress. That's like the American Parliament. But you have to be 35 to be the president, or to stand as a candidate for president. Right now there's a really popular Democratic woman. There's a Netflix film about her called Knock Down the House, called Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Lots of people would like to run for the Democratic nomination, but she's only 30, so she'll have to wait a few years. Trump, by contrast, is 72, and therefore is more than qualified, as far as this is concerned, to be the office holder for president. But what about this one? It's not true that no president has been elected before Trump without first being elected as a representative or a senator or a governor. In fact, even as recently as the 1950s, Ike Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower, was elected without ever having held elected office. He had actually led the Allied forces at D-Day and the liberation of Europe, so he had some experience of doing some important jobs, but he'd never been really in politics before. So Trump's not the first one to come into the job without having experience. Or question 4. It's not true that if you were born outside of the USA, you can't serve as president. Certainly Trump tried to say that it was, and he also tried to say that Barack Obama had not been born in the USA, claimed that he had been born in Kenya, and forced him to produce a birth certificate to prove that he was actually born in Hawaii. But that's not the rule. The rule is that only natural-born citizens can be candidates or become president of the USA. And you can still be a natural-born citizen even if you're born outside. Ted Cruz, who fought for the Republican nomination against Trump, would have been able to serve as president, but was in fact born in Canada. And it's not true either that no president has been able to serve more than 2 4-year terms. In fact, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, some of you might remember from your GCSE history, served almost 4 terms, being elected first in 1933 until his death in 1945. Trump, of course, has only served 1, and therefore could legitimately serve another term. Though what's interesting is that even Trump has suggested that he might serve a 3rd term or a 4th term, and has spoken admiringly of the way in which rulers like Xi Jinping in China have changed the rules to allow them to stay in office for longer. And lastly, it's not true that presidents can only be removed from office by election or impeachment. Impeachment means Congress voting to sack a president, to remove them from office. Trump was only the 3rd president to face impeachment proceedings this year, but in the end, a mainly Republican Senate decided to keep him in the role regardless of whether he was guilty of the charges that were placed against him. So Trump, by this score, is still fit to serve. Presidents can be removed, though, if they appear to be mentally incapable of continuing with the job. It's something called the 25th Amendment, and it only requires the Vice President and 2 other cabinet members to say that the President shouldn't continue with the job, and then the Vice President becomes the person in the Oval Office. So far that hasn't happened. Trump has been declared fit. So the answer to our question, is Trump fit to be president, is yeah, constitutionally speaking, he meets all the criteria. It's a pretty low bar. You have to be 35, you have to be a US citizen, natural born, and you have to be resident in the US for 14 years. Beyond that, you don't really need any more qualifications. So okay, let's see then how you get into the White House in the first place. Okay, so how does anyone get elected? Where are we right now in the US presidential race, which appears to have been going on for a long time, but we've still got another 5 months to go? Well, the US presidential election process is quite complicated, and sometimes it seems to involve a bewildering number of people who might be candidates, and also events taking place all over America in lots of different states. But we can break it down pretty easily by looking at these 6 steps. Here is a little challenge for you. I've jumbled them up, and what you could do is try and work out in which order they happen. So pause the video for a second and see if you can do it for yourself. I'll show you the answers in a moment. Okay, so did you get them all right? This is the order then. Invisible primaries, in which no voting actually takes place. That's just about trying to get the media to say your name a lot and to spend a lot of money on TV ads. Primaries, in which candidates from each of the parties go from state to state and try and get each state Democratic or Republican parties to support them, including one of the biggest dates during those primaries called Super Tuesday, in which more than a dozen states have their primaries all at the same time. What's been interesting about this race, it's not that unusual, is that the incumbent, Donald Trump, has faced no serious challenger, whereas Democrats have had what we sometimes call a crowded field. For a long time, people thought it might be Bernie Sanders, maybe it might be Liz Warren, maybe it might be this guy with a slightly funny name to say, Pete Buttigieg. In the end, it turned out to be Joe Biden. So right now, we're at the part where we would normally be preparing for national party conventions. All that happens at these is that the party confirms who they want to be their candidate, though we already know because they've already won votes from all over the states, and then the election proper starts, the campaign proper. So we should expect to see some TV debates, we should expect to see lots of candidates crisscrossing America in order to try and win support either for Joe Biden or for Donald Trump. These are strange times. Lots of those things are not necessarily going to happen, certainly not in the way in which we've seen them before. So this is the really exciting thing, I think, about what you're going to do when you come and join us in QE to study politics, is that we're going to be seeing how politicians are making it up as they go along in strange circumstances. The election itself will take place in November. So, who will win? So what are Trump's chances in 2020? Well, most presidents do go on to win a second term. In fact, only 4 out of the last 13 have not managed to do so. Trump might be the 5th. But on the other hand, Democrats, as the opposing party, have recently won a huge victory in congressional elections which took place just over a year ago in 2018. And they might be riding a nationwide wave. Trump hasn't had anyone to challenge him in his own party. On the other hand, some senior Republicans have said that they won't support him in November. People like George W. Bush, who was the president, and therefore that might pull some other Republicans away from supporting Donald Trump. In all sorts of ways, the system favours Donald Trump. He lost the popular vote in 2016, but the election isn't decided on who wins the most votes. It's it's decided on something called the Electoral College. So it didn't matter that Trump lost states like California and New York by millions of votes, because he won some other states like Florida and Pennsylvania by just a tiny margin. However, there are some states that won't vote in the same way as they did in 2016. And for Democrats, this might look good. So for example, Arizona, Virginia, maybe even Texas might flip to the Democrats. And that's partly because their voters have changed in those states. There are more Hispanic voters, there are more younger voters, more registered voters. That might tip the balance. One reason that might have been in favour of Trump before the coronavirus is that presidents often say it's the economy, stupid. If the economy is strong while they've been in office, they can say, look, I made you better off. And they often win. But if the economy grew under Trump before the coronavirus, it's collapsed since then. In fact, it was even beginning to go into recession before February. And that means that there are 40 million people right now who had jobs before, who now don't, may not decide that they're going to put their faith in Donald Trump any longer. Finally, in US elections, it's almost always the case that the candidate with the most money wins. They spend that money travelling from state to state, spending millions of dollars, indeed billions of dollars, on TV ads and campaign staffers. And Trump has raised much more than Joe Biden, much more than anyone else. Trump's already got $320 million to spend campaigning just for himself. But these are unprecedented times, and the impact of coronavirus, alongside the killing of George Floyd by police in Minneapolis, has seen Trump's approval ratings plummet. And that means Joe Biden is currently in the lead, some polls by up to 15%. That's a big gap for Trump to try and catch up. So, let's see whether Joe Biden keeps that lead until November. So can Trump be stopped in 2020? Well, your answer to that question probably depends upon what you think about this man, Joe Biden. He's the challenger. Joe Biden will be the Democratic Party's candidate in November, after beating fellow septuagenarian Bernie Sanders. There are a lot of septuagenarians, lots of 70-odd-year-olds in American politics right now. It's another question we're going to try and answer next year when we come back. But like every candidate, Joe Biden has good points and he has some bad points. See if you can work out from this little list which ones are good and which ones are bad. You can pause for a moment and have a think about it. Okay, so your list probably looks a bit like this. Joe Biden has bags of experience. Joe Biden was in the White House for 8 years with Obama, who interestingly is still really popular. In fact, probably popular because people see the president they've got right now.
This also gives the internet one last chance to talk about our bromance.
So Joe Biden can talk about the lots of experience that he's got, and that means that he's quite the opposite to Donald Trump. Joe Biden's also the consummate politician. He's been around for a long time in the Senate. He served 39 years as a lawmaker, as a senator. What he did in that time was to make compromises and work across the aisle with other politicians. So he's shown that he can get laws made. By contrast, Trump has failed to get any significant legislation passed. He's failed to get healthcare reform, and in 2 occasions, he's managed to end up shutting down federal government because he fell out with Democrats in the House and the Senate. So, Joe Biden looks like he could build his career on compromise. Perhaps most obviously, Joe Biden is not Donald Trump. Donald Trump is really unpopular at the moment. He's suffered some of the worst disapproval ratings of any president, and that's particularly the case since the coronavirus. So, in all sorts of ways, it doesn't really matter whether it was Joe Biden or anybody else. Perhaps any Democrat standing now in November ought to be able to beat Donald Trump. And indeed the polls showed that Bernie Sanders would have been just as popular, and so would Liz Warren, and even Pete Buttigieg, who nobody heard of, but they still trusted him more than Donald Trump. And again, unlike Trump, Joe Biden is a unifying figure. Joe Biden is somebody who's appealed to all sorts of people in the middle of US politics, and that's particularly true of older voters who might not normally vote for Democrats. On the other hand, Joe Biden is 78. That would make him 82 by the end of his first term. And if he stood for another term, that would make him 86. He's already the person who would be the oldest president to take office if he wins in November.
I want to be clear. I'm not going nuts. You're a damn liar, man. That's not true. I can get things done. That's why I'm running. And you want to check my shape on it, let's do push-ups together here, man. Let's run. Let's do whatever you want to do.
To the words united, to the number 30330, 30330, or 303330, or BOO, wait, but you got it.
That saves billions of gallons of gasoline. I mean, billions of, I think it's $2.3 billion worth of, $500 billion in savings and 2-point-something billion metric tons of CO2 going in the air.
Some people may worry about his mental capacity to be able to do so. They also think that he might not serve a full 4 years. So whoever gets to be vice president suddenly becomes a really important choice. That's a big minus for Joe Biden. And that thing about a compromiser, well, maybe that used to look good in the 70s, but that looks bad if the deals you made were with racist, segregationist senators from the South, and if you voted on things to do with African Americans' civil rights, which now look questionable 25 or 30 years on.
Do you agree today that you were wrong to oppose busing in America then?
No.
The momentum in US politics is not in favor of more of the same. The momentum is in favor of progressive change, for Democrats at least. And that means that Joe Biden's got problems in his own party, so that young and radical voters who would have preferred Bernie Sanders don't trust him, in the same way that they didn't trust Hillary Clinton. Now, it worked out badly for her. When they didn't show up for her in Wisconsin, Michigan and Pennsylvania, it cost her the state and the whole election. If the same things happens with Joe Biden, we'll see history repeat itself, because he wasn't radical enough to win over his own party's supporters. And finally, Joe Biden is a bit of an easy target for Donald Trump. Already, Joe Biden has been implicated in, I guess you'd call it nepotism, finding jobs for his son, who is completely unqualified, in a Ukrainian gas firm. Lots of people think that Joe Biden used his position as vice president to do that. That looks corrupt. For Trump, he'll say that's crooked. And in fact, he'll say exactly the same things about Joe Biden that he said about Hillary Clinton. Perhaps with just enough truth in order to swing some independent voters away from the Democrats to lose the election again.
President Trump made a totally unsubstantiated claim about Hunter Biden and his father. It's not unsubstantiated, you crooked son of a guns. It's 100% true.
So there you have it. We've looked at just a little bit of American politics, but a really important bit coming up into 2020. We've looked at whether Trump's fit for office. Yes, sort of, by a very low bar. We've looked at how you get to be president. It's a long process, and it's about to get really weird in the current circumstances. And we've looked at who's most likely to win, either Trump or Biden. And the jury may still be out there. You can make your predictions now. We'll see whether you're right in November. Hopefully, you'll be able to join us next term. We'll be looking at this a bit more closely. If you want to find out more about what we've been looking at, you could follow the links which come at the end of this video, or you can go to the Politics Google site, which has got its own section about US politics there. You can see the kind of things that our students have been studying, and also their experience of, for example, going to Washington, D.C. So if you have any questions about the course, then feel free to get in touch with us at tdab@g.qelis.ac.uk. And thanks for your time. Hopefully, look forward to seeing you after the summer.